You're listening to episode 18 of The Secular Buddhist. Welcome to The Secular Buddhist. I'm Ted Meissner. The Secular Buddhist is the podcast and website for modern, secular application of early Buddhist thought. The podcast has interviews and roundtable discussions pertaining to engaged Buddhist training and practice, and the companion website has show notes for each episode, along with resource materials on Buddhism, critical thinking, science, secularism, and skeptical thought. Though the podcast focuses on core practice from a secular viewpoint, more traditional teachings are welcome and openly discussed. Today we have our second installment from episode 3 on the question, Meditation, Buddhist and Christian, Is There a Common Ground? And get a preview of Rodrigo Rodriguez's upcoming CD, Shakuhachi Meditations. Hi everyone, glad to have you back, and welcome new listeners. Before we get to the regularly scheduled episode, I want to extend a special thanks to Rodrigo Rodriguez, who has very generously allowed me to use several works from his not-yet-released CD, Shakuhachi Meditations, which should be in stores soon. In the meantime, because the nature of this episode has a few breaks in it, I hope you'll enjoy a few extra, slightly longer rounds of sounds to whet your appetite for the CD, something with which to enjoy this episode's drink of choice. Remember to relax and just listen. Shakuhachi was used by the Japanese Fuke sect monks to attain liberation, so if any of you experience full enlightenment while listening to the podcast, be sure to drop Sensei Rodriguez a note of thanks. Send him a note of thanks anyway for lending us his talent. Way back in the mists of time, in an age when dragons were real. Not really. And magic flowed like rivers through the ether. Not really. There was episode 3 of The Secular Buddhist. It was part 1 of a recording from an Interreligious Symposium at Bethel University from fall of 2009. Well, in the flurry of activity and scheduled interviews, I'd not gotten around to completing part 2. Time to get that off my plate and, well, onto your iPods. It may seem odd, having a dialogue between a secular Buddhist and people of faith in another tradition entirely, but that's one of the things I think we need to do in our world of ever-present and quickly escalated divisiveness. We're on this spaceship Earth together, like it or not, and though we should, I believe, challenge ourselves and each other when we see harmful practices, we should also reach out, find commonalities, find goals we share. We Buddhists, secular or religious, have a practice that fosters metta, loving friendliness, karuna, compassion, mudita, joy at others' successes, and upekkha, equanimity. That's not meant just for us. Some of the most rewarding experiences come from my discussions with a devout Baptist friend of mine I've mentioned before in the podcast. Not because either of us gets anywhere in convincing the other of our positions, we don't, but because in sharing of our views, we're practicing some things we both find to be of great personal value. Love, understanding, and the knowledge from direct experience that we have these deep differences which do not in any way interfere with that joy at simply talking together and even disagreeing. Our intent isn't to convince one another, it's to share our point of view, to increase our understanding of the other guy. When we have a better understanding of the other person's view, we have an understanding of the person with that view. My apologies for the sound quality. This was recorded with a teeny tiny little hand recorder in a presentation hall. The following segments are from the question and answer part of the symposium. So sit back, relax, have a nice orange-ade. That's orange juice, a bit of water, and sugar to taste. In the first segment, a question was asked from the audience, can you meditate and still be a Christian? Sure, you can even be an atheist.
Yeah, there are a lot of folks who, in my early experience with this at the Zen Center, are very devout Christians. We have people who are from many, many different backgrounds. The last retreat that I went on, one of those long ones where you're sitting for a long period of time, we had people who were Hindu, who were Theravada Buddhist, we had Zen Buddhists, we had Christians. I think we even had a lawyer. It was amazing. There were all kinds of people there. So one of the things it's really important to get out of this, I think more than anything else, is that we're used to the term Buddhist meditation, but we don't own the brand name. It's not just Buddhist meditation. We have that association because that's what, we all know who the Dalai Lama is. And when we see a monk with robes, we know what that is. So we have that association because culturally we're used to seeing that. But as Paul was saying, this is not limited to a particular religious point of view. It is something for people who can breathe and have minds. That's going to cover all of us. And so as you're thinking about, well, yeah, but I'm a good Christian. Well, yes, but all of us had our hands up at some point. We've all made mistakes. And being a good Christian or a good Buddhist or a good Jew or whatever, we still all have the ability to trip and stumble and make mistakes. We all do that. And meditation is one way that works for many people to help us do that a little better and to recover a little better, because you're still going to make mistakes. We're always going to do that. But do take away from this the idea that you don't have to take on an entire religion, an entire point of view of Buddhism to start a meditative practice. The basics of meditation that Bhante Sivali was describing, there's nowhere in there that you have to start worshiping anything else than what you already have with you in your heart and your faith.
The next question was about how do Buddhists practice, And this segment will segue into questions you'll hear from the audience directly about kinds of Buddhism, external influences in meditation, and then another asking about varieties of people who practice meditation.
When we talk about how Buddhists practice, that's such a wide range of kinds of Buddhism. What Bhante Siwali practices is the earliest form of Buddhism from 2,500 years ago. What we see in Zen is a descendant of that. That doesn't mean that it's watered down or wrong. It just means it's a descendant, and its focus is very much so on meditation. So you see Zen actually, one of its meanings is meditation. With the earlier teachings of Buddhism, there's also a very strong focus on scholarly work and study. So it's difficult to pigeonhole Buddhist practice is this. Well, yeah, but who's doing the practice? Is it someone who is a very devout Christian and practicing meditation in order to have that closeness with God? Or is it someone who has had the experience and there's more resonance with them to Buddhist teaching itself? This is something Paul was mentioning about self-validation of experience not really being valid. I agree with that completely. We often delude ourselves. This is one of the primary points of Buddhism, is that we think we know what's going on, and meditation helps us see what our own motivations are. And we can trick ourselves. The mind tricks itself all the time. Optical illusions are a direct way in which our mind tricks us. So he's absolutely right in that. Empiricism only goes so far. And in Theravada Buddhism, there's the phrase ehipassiko, which means come and see. Try it out for yourself. It may not be something that you find appealing, resonates with you, or the least bit helpful. It may be something as you take on a regular practice that is very helpful, but you won't know without actually trying. Paul's question about why Buddhists don't try a Christian form of meditation, I would suggest that's not necessarily the case. And many of the Christians that I know, and in particular the Zen Center, that's entirely why they're there, is to make sure that they get the support for having a practice. Because one of the hardest things to do is to actually sit down on the cushion and do your meditation. So what they're doing in their meditation is very different than the person sitting next to them. That their end goal, as Paul was saying, is very different than the person sitting next to them. And that in turn will be a bit different from the end goal of my approach or Bhante Siwali's.
Paul mentioned quieting oneself and the work of the Holy Spirit within in healing and other things. And I'm wondering if in the Buddhist tradition, if there is any comparable concept of something from above or without, or from a transcendent level, whether you want to call it grace or make it more personal, the Holy Spirit, that comes through meditation, or that you make yourself more available to, or can see, or can hear, or can understand a little bit more, or is it all sort of from within the person? So is there a transcendent dimension coming down? I hate to use spatial metaphors because I realize they're only metaphors, but something from outside that you don't have in yourself, and can't have in yourself, and never would have in yourself, no matter how deep you go.
Yep.
But from the outside it comes in and then works in the work of transformation, of healing, of whatever it is that needs to be done. Is there any comparable concept?
I'll give you three answers, all of which may be equally very satisfying or unsatisfying. We'll see at the end of it. Traditional Buddhism is very much based on one's own efforts. So in its very basic level, meditation is about your work, not something from outside. Now, the flip side of that coin is, as we were discussing, part of the a shared intent, regardless of tradition with meditation, is that you are letting go of the stuff that gets in the way, of just day-to-day activities or even thoughts going on in your mind. I would see from a Christian standpoint, sweeping the mind and clearing that out can only bring you closer to have that more direct experience. It certainly has that effect with just very mundane things. When you're on a retreat for a few days and your mind is really calmed down, and they bring you a plain old vegetarian bowl of goo, it's the most wonderful meal you've ever had in your life because there are no distractions, there's nothing in the way. So, second answer is you'll be far more open to that kind of experience. The third is the early Buddhist texts also have, I'll say encouragement. The one that comes to mind most is at a story of at Buddha's enlightenment. He thought, in colloquial terms, wow, this is really complicated. Nobody's going to do this. This is hard. Why would anyone do this? And there was a inspiration, I would say, a direct visit by a deity within that context. This is a Brahmanic culture at the time, who said, no, really, you need to do this. This is not something that people are going to get on their own. And so there are stories within Buddhist faith that say, yeah, there are instances where deities would step in and directly influence even Buddha himself at the time of his enlightenment to go forth and teach for the next 45 years. Does that kind of answer the question too much? Thank you. Good question.
Are you saying that sin, that said earlier that the question that Dr. Wiesner asked, whether Christians can, why more Buddhists don't perform Christian meditation? Did I understand your ask to be correct, that there's enough difference from person to person in the form of meditation, that there is no Buddhist meditation?
There is, kinda, and it's very complicated. So it's understanding that it would be confusing because this is not something we grow up with. There are Christians who practice exactly as Paul was describing, even in Buddhist meditation centers. There are Buddhists who are from Western background, who are meditating in a more traditional Buddhist methodology, which, and this is where I'm going to interject, that doesn't really conflict with anything we would have as intent as Christians, because we'll be meditating on, for example, of that list of 40 kinds of techniques of meditation, metta being one of them. That's loving kindness. That seems like a pretty Christian ideal to me, so I don't really see any conflict with the idea that I'm going to be thinking of and wishing well for and meditating on love for my family, my friends, even to a point, and metta meditation, one of the reasons it is so popular is it is kind of challenging. You get to a point of wishing well and happiness for your enemies, people you don't like. And there's nothing more turn the other cheek than that I know of, so I don't see that as conflicting.
In Buddhist meditation, I was wondering if, like, when you get into the meditative state, it does things with your thoughts. Do you always have full control of that? Or can it do different things psychologically to you, especially in guided meditation?
It's certainly not anyone else in control. So, yeah, it's just you. And I think part of that is based on is the idea that you're in kind of an altered mental state, which can be akin to hypnosis and maybe more suggestive. I have not found that to be so. I have found quite the opposite, that I'm much more in control of what's going on in my head, because the process isn't you have this bubbling of thoughts, like a boiling pot of water. And as you're meditating and you're entering, you don't even need to hit alternate mind states, just calm water, just cool it off. And there's nothing alternate about that at all. What you're doing is you're not getting distracted by the constant bubbling of all those thoughts that are going on in your head all the time. It's never stopping. So,
well, let me just add a slightly different perspective from my own experience. I was a graduate student in Tokyo in the late 70s. For some people, it was kind of the end of the hippie trail. They'd done hashish up in Kathmandu and, wandered through various places and finally ended up in Tokyo doing Zen or something like that. There was actually a very good Japanese psychiatrist who worked very hard at trying to patch up young foreigners who were doing Zen meditation and were losing control. And one explanation of that is, if you do meditation and watch your thoughts come up, some thoughts will come up that you haven't thought about in a long time, and that, in Jungian psychology, this is the unconscious starting to come up or something like that. And I think it is important to recognize that sometimes things can get a little bit difficult. Normally, that you're working with someone who's able to, a director of some type or a master who's able to talk you through and keep you stable or centered or something like that. But one of my friends fell apart, and he couldn't walk by the time we got him to the plane, and I had to buy a plane ticket and get him back to the States and all of that. So there are cases where it's not a trivial thing to enter into this kind of road. It's not. It's easy for basic everyday centering your life, but as you go deeper, it's not necessarily a trivial thing.
As a redirect on that, what I would state is, just from a purely scientific frame, I know the diagnosis name has changed, but schizophrenics tend not to do so well with meditation because there's a lot of voices going on, and that is very challenging. I'd also suggest that because folks who have been polluting their minds with drugs may have unfortunate episodes when they take a close look at their minds, I'm not the least bit surprised.
The last two questions in the final segment were, is there community in Buddhism? Followed right away by another question about what motivates us to meditate, read by James Lewis, Director of Religious Studies at Bethel University. Answered first by Bhante Siwali of the Minnesota Buddhist Vihara.
On the practice level itself, it is, if you've ever been a part of something like train for a marathon or something like that, it's hard to get up in the morning and do your long run. It's hard to make yourself sit on the cushion and do your meditation as well. So it's often done in a community setting where, people are going to be there. It does support your practice. There are exceptions, of course. Many people find sitting by themselves is the way to go, and they have the discipline to do that. But that can be very challenging by itself. I agree completely with what Paul and Bhante Siwali have said, in that the outcomes of this practice are very much community building tools in how you relate to one another. When we talk about loving kindness practice, loving kindness tends to be towards your fellow man, towards your community, towards those you interact with. So very much so.
What motivates you to meditate, every day was the question.
It's also a good question. We practice as a monastic every day, morning and evening, morning 1 hour and as well as evening. But all day we have to spend our time with, that means the mindfully. We have to be mindfully all the time. That kind of meditation different than the normal life. People eat, but we don't eat. We do same thing in different way. We had to mix and bring it and eat. That's we had to do it mindfully. People when they drinks tea or anything, coffee or whatever, people just drink. But the monastic, we had to do it with the mindfully, that kind of difference than the normal life.
Let me ask a question on the motivation part. I would guess not as many hands. How many people remember what you had for dinner last night? Pretty good. That's awesome. That's better than most of us. The motivation question is a good one because unless you have some motivation, you're not going to do it. On the surface, it looks really boring. And unless you have the right approach to that, it will be really boring or really stressful and very hard. When in fact it can be very uplifting and very inspiring a process for you. So what for many Westerners, the reason that we take on a regular practice of this might not be daily, but don't tell Bhante that I might not sit every day, is the changes that you see in your every interaction. Being a monastic, it isn't just their job, it's an entire way of life. And so having a mindfulness, being aware of what's going on, and mindfully eating, and mindfully sitting, and mindfully walking, and speaking, and dealing with daily activities, it is, as Bhante said, we don't live in that world, not being monastics. But we can enjoy a certain degree of having a more light approach to our life. For many people, it's very transformative in that you're not prone to getting as angry or stressed or any number of things that is that initial, oh, I really didn't want to say that or do that. So that's a very big motivation if you're a person who has kind of struggles with suffering from stress, or you're the kind of person who struggles with anger management or things like that. You do see with the regular practice, it doesn't have to be 2 hours a day, 10 minutes when you can squeeze it in. At Bhavana Society, one of the retreat centers, they do mindfulness minutes. You set an alarm on your watch once an hour. I'm just going to sit for a minute. And that changes the whole tone of the day. So how you take things improves more and more. And that's enough motivation because you're so much happier. And the people around you notice it. It makes a very big difference.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the companion website at www.thesecularbuddhist.com, and you'll find an entire web page devoted to this and every episode. There are also links to discussions about today's topic on the Secular Buddhist Facebook fan page. The music for The Secular Buddhist is used by permission from John Kaizan Neptune's CD, Steps in Time. Additional music is provided courtesy of Monty Levinson of Taihei Shakuhachi and Rodrigo Rodriguez. Their websites are linked on The Secular Buddhist on the About Music page. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on The Secular Buddhist.